Welcome to Green Building Matters, the podcast that matters for green building professionals. Learn insight in green buildings as we interview today's experts in LEED and WELL. We'll learn from their career paths, war stories, and all things green, because green building matters. And now our host, and yes, he has every LEED and WELL credential. Here's Charlie Cicchetti.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. Today, I'm joined by Marc Mondor, and he's one of the principals at evolveEA. We want to talk more about his green building consulting and design firm, but Marc's been lead faculty for over 12 years, and he's a lead fellow. Just an interesting story. And Marc, can't wait to get into the discussion. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Charlie. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you.
And you're in the Pittsburgh area now, but I always like to go to those origin stories. I believe you spent some time in California. Marc, can you tell us a little bit about where'd you grow up and where'd you go to school?
I'm originally from Quebec, but I lived in California for about 20 years, and that included studying engineering at UC San Diego and studying architecture at Cal Poly. And when I started to get more interested in sustainable design, although it didn't really have a name just yet, I also studied in Scandinavia and Denmark. So that was really what kindled my interest. And then I moved to Pittsburgh and began work as an architect, always trying to bring sustainability and green building into projects. But, there was really no name for the type of work that we wanted to do back then. Of course, now there is. But, so early on, it started with a sort of ethic and, hearing certain people who were influential to me as well. And that's kind of what drew me towards sustainability and green building. And
Sure.
We're eventually able to kind of make it into a business.
And looking, Marc, at your studies, you've got the mechanical engineering side at UC San Diego and then the architecture side at Cal Poly. So did you change course or are you like both engineering and architecture?
Well, I kind of did change course now that you mention it. I thought I wanted to become an engineer. And my third year, I had the chance to study in France. And, it's a different time horizon when you're in Europe than growing up in Southern California. So really made me look at the big picture. And so those types of bigger perspectives made me want to pursue architecture. And so I still have a head for numbers and I like how things work, but I've really become more of an architect. But even now in my work, I'm more of a systems design guy than I am an architecture design guy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I do get that. And, several of the green building professionals I've had here on the podcast maybe had that early opportunity with their studies, but especially that study abroad really helped with the sustainability kind of aha. Was that the case for you? What was that aha? I want to make a career out of sustainability.
Yeah, that's an insightful point, Charlie. My first year in Europe and France was where I thought I'd go into architecture. A few years later, as I was wrapping up architecture school for my last year, I was able to study in Denmark. And that was where I really was interested in sustainable design. Over there, it might not have had a name per se. It was just the right way to do things in low impact, resource efficient way. But I became attracted to architects and designers who specifically were thinking that way, and as well as classes and professors. And I realized that environmental design was referred to as an architectural style, just like modernism or anything else. And it seemed to me like, it could be referred to as a style, but in reality, it's much deeper than that because it's a sort of ethic by which you go about designing, and you look far beyond just the components of the building. You're actually looking at all the systems that impact the building.
No, you got to look holistically. Absolutely. Marc, along the way, who was an early influence for you? Did you have any mentors in your career?
Yeah, that's fair to say. At Cal Poly, there was a professor named Willard, Australian, who had this perspective that I'd never seen before. And Ken Haggard and Polly Cooper were professors of mine. In Denmark, a professor named Jorn Peter Hansen, who was influential just in the way he looked at things and explained them. And then as I got into practice, I became friends with Bill Browning, who I'd refer to as an early mentor. I'm sure your listeners knew who Bill Browning is probably. But early on, it was important for me to have the kind of validation from somebody like him that this was a career path worth pursuing.
Yeah, it's great. Definitely that good influence on you. And that name came quickly to your mind. So what brought you to Pittsburgh after that stint in California?
Well, I graduated right into a bad recession, but while I was in Denmark, I struck up a relationship with Christine, who became my wife and my partner, and she was from here, from Pittsburgh, and she's studying from Carnegie Mellon University. So I thought I'd come to Pittsburgh and give it a try, and I haven't really looked back.
That's awesome. No, they can do that to us. The last 14 years, you've really grown your firm there, evolveEA, the environment, the architect side of it. So what are some highlights along the way? I know we talked earlier about first lead project in Africa, first lead supermarket. So I'm sure there's a ton of milestones, but what really stands out to you along the way here?
Yeah, it's fun to look back and think about which projects have had more impact. And sometimes it's a very subjective thing. It can be something that was of importance to our firm or our development or getting introduced with a certain client, or better yet, the impact that it might have had on the particular client, their portfolio and notoriety. But some of the early projects, you always try to think of what was first, what was created that didn't exist before, and now you look back on and say, of course, like for instance, when we started working with Giant Eagle, a big supermarket chain here in this region, supermarkets did not have daylighting. They did not have windows. They all had vinyl flooring. The lighting was all this horrific fluorescent lighting. And so some of the concepts that we brought in were to them, and in so doing, we did the first LEED certified supermarket. And we're able to bring the outside in a lot of ways and really try to promote that. And that gave them a lot of visibility as a chain. And we were involved with a number of supermarket chains trying to integrate daylighting with skylights, with lighting systems, with material systems, with food delivery systems, with transportation, with customer engagement, and with communications, and all of these different things that go into making a lower impact building that has a high customer user comfort and satisfaction. So where those things go together. So if I were to say the supermarket work, it's a whole body of work that we did that we've been working on that has had an impact. Another one is we did a project in Egypt for HSBC, and this is a global concern, and they wanted to do a global processing center. So the owners were under a mandate to do it as a LEED certified project without necessarily understanding what that was. And so through another LEED fellow or LEED faculty at the time anyway, our name was put into the ring. And so we ended up working with this team here of very intelligent, well-intentioned professionals in Cairo, and ended up with this regional headquarters that was the first LEED certified project in Africa. And it was the kind of project where we got everybody engaged, and that was fine. And there's different peculiarities with regards to how they deliver project out there that make for a higher level of quality control, as well as the way that the work-labor balance is almost on its head. Materials are really expensive. Labor is really inexpensive out there, which is different than what we're used to. But we also had to create a lot of communications graphics for them with regards to what LEED is and why should they care about this rating system that's from the United States. It's not a no-brainer like it might be to us over here stateside, but over there it was like, why are we doing this? Well, and here's why: lower impact, better environment, better tracking, more comfort, more health and site issues and water. So all of these things together are part of why we're able to have an impact with that particular project.
A couple of things that stood out to me there, Marc. You're right. Sometimes here in the U.S., since it's a U.S. LEED program, we might take it for granted that here it's so common, and there's 2.2 million square feet certified every day, and it's a little easier to have a conversation. But yeah, you had to convince a lot of people, even though maybe ownership wanted it, but you have to make sure everybody on the team kind of gets it and cares. So fun project, and congrats. Yeah. The other thing I heard, and I say this a lot, is highlight reel. It's okay to look back, and we should look back on the highlight reel. It's not an in the moment thing. It's, hey, what have we been able to do this year? What have we been able to do over the last 10 years? And so that's why I have a little fun here on the podcast to take you back to some of your highlight reel. So what else stands out, Marc? You're a LEED fellow. Congratulations on that. But you're very active. And I want to ask you a little bit about the teaching side of it. We've gotten to know each other there a little bit with some of your partnership with GBES, my education company. And just so you've been a LEED faculty for a while, which means you teach on a lot of different subjects. Is there one subject in particular you really like to get out and speak on or teach about?
I think I just enjoy speaking about what I'm excited about. And I think this might go out as general advice to people listening. If you really like what you're doing and you really believe in it, your conviction will come through. And then being able to, quote, sell your idea is really a byproduct of that. So having said that, there's a lot of aspects of sustainability that I think are really relevant. And I'm happy to talk about them. I do teach a class at Chatham University about green building and sustainability and LEED certification, as well as other sustainability frameworks. So that's for master students. I enjoy doing that. And yes, you and I met as LEED faculty. And so I've always enjoyed traveling and teaching professionals about LEED and green building concepts. So those are no-brainers in the sense that I love doing that. I think in a further sense, though, anytime you're talking to anybody about anything, you're kind of selling. You're either selling an idea or you're at least explaining a concept. And so to the level that you can explain it with a certain clarity and the level that you can make connections, I think that that's really relevant. So one of my roles as well is I'm serving on the Climate Change Advisory Committee for Pennsylvania, where we're trying to come up with a climate action plan for 2018. And so that has to do a lot with explaining why carbon reduction is relevant. And we live in a day and age where a lot of people are skeptical about any type of sustainability or energy efficiency and things like that. So we have to try to explain with facts why this is really relevant and important. And you end up kind of seeing a sort of urban and rural dichotomy emerge in terms of where people are coming from and what their data set, where their perceptual set is. So there's a lot of talking and explanation for that. And I'm also chairing the Committee on the Environment for AIA Pennsylvania. And so with that, we're trying to get sustainability concepts out there as a legitimate clearinghouse for conferences, for projects, for people, for products that are relevant to our state of Pennsylvania. And of course, this maps into the larger national discussion. But the idea is that we're trying to get these, whether they're conferences, whether they're concepts, these things to be for people to be interested in. And then that taps over into the government affairs at AIA Pennsylvania, which I'm chairing that committee. And that has to do with legislation that we're advocating for at the state level. And so we have to do a lot of explanation there to senators and legislators and people of why certain things that your listeners might think are just very basic, but we actually have to explain why they're important and why renewables are a good idea and why reducing carbon is a good idea, and how there should be a price on carbon and how that could be beneficial to the economy. All of these different things, we're constantly talking about them. And so I would throw that into the sort of umbrella of teaching, because there's a lot of that we do with everything that, every conversation that we have.
No, it's very important, and I'm proud of you for having those conversations. One thing I've noticed, when we talk about LEED, it's building by building, right? Maybe with the exception of LEED for neighborhood development, a live, work, play community, but LEED is about the building, individual buildings or a group of buildings. Carbon, it seems like maybe that's what a company, corporate sustainability, is concerned with. That's what a city or a state's concerned with. So you're right, you've got to shift the conversation from building by building and energy efficiency, which helps with carbon, but it's a lot more macro, right? These carbon discussions, sometimes that's all people want to talk about. And when we're working building by building, it's more about save water, save energy, get LEED points. So can you speak to that a little bit? Is the carbon goal, or are you making some good progress there? What are you most excited about on that front? You're very involved here.
Yeah, and I think your observation is right on. It's great to do a green building, but then you have to start looking at the fabric that plugs into. Our work has evolved, if you will, into larger scale projects to where we're not just looking at buildings, but actually looking at districts, communities, campuses. And we've been doing a lot of eco-districts work. In fact, my partner, Christine, has been pioneering that. We've been working with eco-districts since 2009. And that's been a nice way to actually knit together the buildings to the larger fabric. And when you start doing that, then your opportunity for community engagement and stakeholder involvement is much greater, because now you're actually fighting for a cause, if you will, and you're able to get much more activation of people. So when you take a look at a district and you put on environmental layers, if you will, for whether it's a city or a community or a neighborhood, you're now looking at not just where the jobs are, you're looking at how much energy can be produced here, how much food can you produce here, how much stormwater can be infiltrated on site. And all of these things together make a better engaged group of people. But when you start adding in the economic arguments of making your own energy or saving your own energy, then that starts to engage as well. So people are able to see that low carbon is more advantageous for everybody. So that becomes a sort of organizing principle. So when we start looking at it from the state level, if you will, and Pennsylvania has the distinction of being an energy exporter. So we also have more water than we use, if you will, being in the Northeast. So people naturally have this idea of, well, why should we bother to save it when we have plenty of it? And so you have to get into a sort of mindset where what you're trying to do is be responsible and optimize as opposed to just being wasteful and maximizing. And so the carbon side, the larger of a scope that you look at, the more impact you can have. So yeah, buildings are fine, but when you start looking at neighborhoods and cities or states or grid regions, then you're able to actually come up with legislation and things that can have an impact. So, we've just upgraded our building codes here. That's something we're really proud of, going from 2009 to 2015. And Philadelphia, meanwhile, gets to go to 2018. So it's a good step moving forward towards more aggressive goals. But what we have there is an economic argument as well as to why it's worth doing. It may cost a little bit more upfront, but you're going to end up with a better product in the life cycle.
Yeah, that's a big jump too with those energy codes, almost skipping an iteration there with some of those ASHRAE 90.1 standards. That's raising the bar. I think sometimes we think it's just New York City and it's the state of California, but no, look at what Philly and Pittsburgh are doing. So I applaud you on that. Anything else keeping you busy today? Any projects you want to kind of highlight?
Some of the work that we've been doing lately, and it's been migration as a firm, but it's also been in response to the technology being available, is really paying attention to healthy environments and post-occupancy, if you will, although you certainly have to design for it. So it starts early too. But well certifications, we talked a lot about LEED earlier here, but the idea of actually certifying that a space is healthy for people, and that the water, that the nourishment, that the light quality, the acoustic quality, water quality, all of those things are conducive to human health. So we've been working with some of the healthcare concerns here in our region, and we've been able to make some headway because there's a natural linkage between healthcare concerns and the health of spaces. And to date, the economic arguments have been made on productivity, worker productivity, but we also believe that there's arguments to be made with regards to kids learning, better sales per square foot, faster discharge rates in hospitals, things like that. So these are some of the things that we're working on now. The other thing about healthy environments is that there's an objective element to it in terms of being able to measure your actual levels and temperatures of particulates and things like that. But there's also a whole professed element of how do people feel about the space. And as we're trying to track those things and understand that a bit better, we're able to work back upstream to the design phase to where we're able to get more better environments that people are happier with. And that's ultimately a good measure. And so when you zoom out of this conversation we've been having, Charlie, you can have carbon on one side and comfort on the other. And if those two can work together, then that's where I see this future of sustainability going.
I like that. That's a good picture you just painted there. And it's a good segue to my next question, which is, all right, Marc, pretend we had a crystal ball. What's around the corner? What should we be reading up on? You've mentioned wellness, well, and Fitwell, some great programs out there. There's the regenerative design. There's the eco districts. There's so much, but where do you think we should focus? What's really going to be a big impact? What's around the corner?
Oh, boy, that's a good question. Did you have that crystal ball? Well, first off, I think one of the big drivers here is technology, and everyone in the whole planet has been influenced by it in the last 20 years. It's been an exponential rate of growth, not just growth, but rate of growth. And that's what is freaking out a lot of people and making them wish for the bygone days of when things were simpler. So these things are happening super fast. And what does that mean now? If the majority of people can have an iPhone that actually has connectivity with everything else going on around the world, then you have a very fast awareness of how you're doing and how things around you are doing. So with this awareness that people are going to have for what's available to them, what the temperature is, what the forecast is, what the air quality is, what the solar radiation is, how far are they from where they're going in terms of transit, how many more minutes until the bus comes. With this sort of connectivity, I think we're going to see massive efficiencies that occur as a result. I think these things, and we can lump in autonomous vehicles and autonomous freight and automated goods delivery, technology, the advance of robotics, these things are happening fast. And as much as we can't recognize things that may have been 20 years ago, that pace is going to pick up even further. So having said that, there's greater awareness. There's going to be going to have an ability to engage people in a way that they weren't able to before. So it's very exciting because you're going to have the ability to not only respond to your environment, but synthesize and contribute to it. As the world gets flatter and flatter, you're going to have more and more people able to contribute more and more. While at the same time, you're going to have a half dozen companies that actually have the real power in the world. So the world gets flatter as it gets steeper, I think. But I think that's really going to be driving a lot of the technology and sustainability that we see moving forward.
Yeah, I really agree. And it is an exciting time with all these advancements and seeing how it affects how we design and build and operate buildings. And of course, all these rating systems we work in. So very, very good point. All right, let's go through some rapid fire questions here. Marc, you're a busy guy. You're volunteering a lot of your time and you're growing your firm and working on amazing projects. So how do you stay successful and productive? Do you have any routines or rituals?
Well, gosh, I think 90% of success is showing up. But having said that, I'm blessed, and Christine, my partner, are blessed to have a really good office. We try to empower people in the right ways, and everybody contributes, so that helps. On the personal side, I do try to work out a good 4 times a week at least, and have that be a regular part of what I do. Some weeks are longer than others, but I think just in general, keeping it together. And we've got good friends, and we're involved in a lot of different community things. So all in all, it makes the work part of a larger puzzle, which is important to keep in perspective.
No, thanks for sharing that. That's good advice. I'm a fan of the bucket list. Are there 1 or 2 things on your bucket list you can share? Personal, adventure, work? What's on the bucket list?
Well, I tend to think of those things in terms of travel and places I haven't yet been. And I'd like to try to experience. I've never been to South America, and I would love to go down there. And aside from doing the obvious postcard things of Machu Picchu and some of the Mayan ruins, Inca ruins, I think to try to go down and try to immerse myself a little bit. I try to be a traveler instead of a tourist. So that would be something I'd like to do. Australia or Barrier Reef, surfing out that way, I think would be a lot of fun. So traveling, but also just absorbing as well. And I'd like to try to, at some point, get to the point where I'm writing books, kind of being personal here, but I'm also putting it out there. I'd like to try to slow down on the day-to-day enough to actually be able to put forth and export what I have to offer in that particular way. So I'd like to try to lecture and teach and write those, in the next decades.
I think you really should. One of my advisors says that everyone has a book in them. So get that first book out there.
Thank you.
Well,
thanks, Charlie.
Let's talk about books. Yeah. Is there something you've read or listened to lately you'd recommend, or even a classic?
Good question. Let's see. On the environmental front, since we're talking about that, I really like Jeffrey Sachs and his writing. He's written some good books. I like Commonwealth in particular. I think he's got a really good way of making these concerns understandable from an economic point of view. I also like behavioral economic books, like the kind written by Dan Ariely. I find those are all very interesting, like Predictably Irrational and just why we decide the things that we decide. And I think I'm reading some of the Walter Isaacson biographies, like Steve Jobs and Leonardo da Vinci right now. Just because I've always liked big titans like that. The Agony and the Ecstasy, written by Irving Stone about Michelangelo, is always one of my favorites. So those books tend to be more about the person than about the actual movement. But even so, I always find that fascinating is, what is one person capable of doing and how has it had an impact? So I'm a sucker for those types of stories.
Yeah, me too. I really, I'm going to check out that Michelangelo book. But Isaacson, he's great. And I really like biographies and autobiographies. Yeah. Fun discussion. Those listening, maybe you've been doing this well, or maybe they're just now breaking into the green building movement. But is there anything you wish you'd have known a little earlier in your career, Marc, or just any words of encouragement here as we wrap up?
That's a good question. The classic thing is like, if only I'd let go or not been afraid to jump. But in reality, sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes I've left before I looked. And it's always kind of a catch-22 of when to do what you're going to do. But I think the idea of just keeping it in perspective and trying to make sure that you're kind of built for the long haul. As one of my favorite rock bands, Rush, would say, you can do a lot in a lifetime if you don't burn out too fast. And it's true. If you can really kind of pace yourself and have a long-term vision and stick to it, then I think the rest will fill itself in.
Yeah, long haul. And you've made quite the career out of the green building movement, and you keep going. So I'll look forward to your book one day, and I look forward to seeing you at Greenbuild and keep teaching together on the education front. But Marc, thanks for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed it.
Charlie, it's a pleasure. Thanks. It's always nice to talk to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.